Most people are familiar with the real estate expression, location, location, location. But what about disclose, disclose, disclose? Honesty and integrity are key to the real estate profession. The purchase of a home is often the largest financial transaction most people will ever make. This requires a great deal of trust and expertise. As real estate professionals, that's why we're specially trained, licensed, and monitored by the state. A cornerstone of our profession is disclosure, and there are two major areas where disclosure is focused. One is regarding the condition of the property in a transaction and matters directly related to it. The second area pertains to us, our role in the transaction and how agency relationships work. And that's where we'll begin. Most states require that prospective customers be provided with a printed statement explaining how agency relationships, such as those involved in real estate, work and what they mean to that prospective client. There are two keys to this process. The first is that providing the printed statement to a potential client by itself is not sufficient. You should get a clear demonstration that the client understands what it says, or that they do not want an explanation. If this is the case, we recommend getting it in writing before proceeding too far. 2. This explanation of agency is not the same as disclosing your own role in the transaction. This is something you must explain in addition to the general disclosure regarding agency. Some of the information you should share includes your role in the transaction in question. If the consumer is a buyer interested in a listing that your firm represents, they need to know that before they share confidential information. This could compromise their negotiating position. An even greater issue is this situation and where no proper explanations are provided to the consumer and they leave believing that you represent them. Although most jurisdictions allow firms to represent both sides of a transaction through dual agency or some alternative such as intermediary agency or transactional services, none allow it without full disclosures to both parties, fully explained and signed in advance. Otherwise, this is known as undisclosed dual agency and is prohibited pretty much everywhere. The other issues that must be disclosed are related to any potential personal interest that you may have in a transaction. This would be a conflict of interest. If you have a personal or business interest in a transaction, other than as the broker, this must be disclosed at the first indication that another party might be interested. This does not mean that any extreme potential that could possibly exist must be anticipated, but any reasonable potential for a conflict of interest must be disclosed ahead of time, or if unforeseen, when the potential arises. This is not exclusive to your own direct personal interest, but also to any business in which you have substantial interest or any immediate family members may have, personally or professionally. Real estate licensees have certain obligations in real estate transactions that other people don't. Because we're licensed professionals, there are higher expectations of us. One of those is to disclose that we're licensees in any real estate transaction in which we participate, even if only as the buyer or seller and not as an agent. Anytime we sell property of our own or that of a family member, we must disclose at the earliest reasonable opportunity. The second major area of disclosure is all about the property. When speaking about these disclosures, we're talking mostly about residential properties, generally with 4 units or less. Other rules may apply to other forms of real estate. Most states provide prepared seller disclosure forms, and while what is required varies by jurisdiction, there are some fairly consistent guidelines. Residential structures that used lead-based paint, mostly those built prior to January 1st, 1978, must be disclosed along with materials explaining the potential health hazards posed by lead-based materials. Likewise, certain hazards such as flooding, some molds, asbestos or radon, for example, or occurrences such as pest damage, foundation issues, or sinkholes may have mandatory required reporting. Always know your local rules. Anything that is not legally required reporting or obvious to the naked eye, of which the agent is aware, is not to be shared without direct, preferably written, directive from the seller. This becomes especially ticklish in what are referred to as psychological stigmas. Psychological stigmas are issues that are associated with a property but not actually a real part of the property. Examples generally include horrific events such as suicides and murders. Some states require disclosure of both. Some don't require suicide, and others don't require either. Anything that is not required disclosure by law is then at the discretion of the property owner. If there's been a death on a property, if not required reporting, and a consumer asks about any deaths on the property, this cannot be answered without the client's authorization. And it cannot be lied about without violating licensing laws. The licensee must politely decline to answer and may offer to refer the question to the owner. Something else that we do know are types of information that are not only not required, but may be prohibited from disclosure. One significant prohibition is anything to do with a previous owner's personal health issues, such as HIV or similar health matters. Race, religion, sexual orientation, or gender identification of former owners, for example, are not relevant and generally not disclosable. So remember, when in doubt about a consumer's understanding of your role, disclose, disclose, disclose. And when asked about the property, check the laws, and if that doesn't require it, then check with the owner. Thank you for learning with At Your Pace Online.